All right. Hello. Thank you all for coming. My name's Yardeni, and we are going to talk about what's new in ASVS v5. Before continuing, I have to ask, is anyone not familiar with OWASP, the OWASP Foundation at this point? Cool. I assume so. I couldn't take it for granted. You never know. It is the last talk of the conference, though, so I'm sure it would have come up for most people. Good to know that we have that out of the way, though. I will be introducing both myself and what ASVS is. Hopefully some of you already know, but I'll be covering it regardless. There's content for everybody, though, if you're using it already or not. And then I'll get into some of the structural changes. In my opinion, there are three from a practitioner standpoint that you should know and care about. There's a lot more from the standpoint of somebody who worked on ASVS v5. I will tell you about those, but as you use it day to day, these are like three big differences I think you all should keep in mind. So I'll bring those up. And then I'm going to go over a specific selection of new requirements that we added. I thought about how to do this because this is a talk about what's new, and I'm like, how does one do a talk about what's new? And I decided very early on in putting this together, it's not going to be a book report where you go through all the chapters and I'll be like, well, we added this one, and then we added this one. This isn't security bedtime stories. So to keep everyone engaged, I'll go over the requirements that I care about. Well, I care about all of them, but some key ones that I think are worth bringing up. And then some of them I'll actually review live with you in a code review format. That's the thing about ASVS. It's meant to be usable and actionable. And as security practitioners, we can actually apply it to a code review. So we're going to do that together live, you and me, friends. And then some calls to action at the end and questions. Cool. So not to be overly vain about it, but in a presentation about what's new to ASVS, first thing I'll talk about is me. I joined the project relatively recently in 2024. I've been a software engineer for 12 years, 5 of those in security and in a full-time capacity. I'll talk about this a bit more later, but I started as a security champion, and that was my gateway drug into AppSec full-time. I've been involved with OWASP to one degree or another over the last few years. On top of joining the ASVS working group, I started a local chapter. Hopefully all of you have local chapters. They're amazing resources to find like-minded people and talk to them. If you don't have one, start one. That's what I did, and you can too. Regrettably, I did move shortly thereafter, but it's a great chapter. I'd love to go back and visit sooner or later. I've been using ASVS, though, since 2017. That's the year I became a security champion. And that came up because I was asking my AppSec team, well, how do I know if I'm doing a good job, right? Like, I want to learn, I want to do good, but how can I measure myself without having to go to you guys all the time? And that's really what ASVS is for, among many other things that I'll get to shortly, and other use cases. So what is ASVS? Let me spell out the acronym, Application Security Verification Standard. In the definition, I endeavored not to reuse the words application security or verification or standard, although I'll get to those too. So the way I think of it is a set of positive requirements that govern properties of application and API code. Let me talk about those bolded vocab words. So by positive, I mean something that you can verify in the affirmative. So some attribute that you can look at code and say, yes, it does that. I've looked at it and I've confirmed. We also became a lot more opinionated about what we want to cover. And I'll get to this in the next slide too. But when I say properties of application and API code, we really tightened our scope to focus specifically on things you can look at code and understand. That means we dropped a lot of things that are earlier in the software process, and I'll get to that too. But we felt that this scope change really strengthened ASVS. So I'll cover all of that. There's a lot of things you can use it for. Like I said, when I was a security champion, it was a useful reference for me to make sure that I'm doing a good job. Same if I'm reviewing peers code, I can go through a chapter. If I'm looking at a pull request that has something to do with authentication, there are plenty of chapters, I will get to those, that govern what are some things that can go wrong, what are some considerations you can keep in mind. So fantastic for human code reviews. I'll get to non-human stuff at the end of the presentation. Fantastic for pen testers as well. When I started doing AppSec full-time, we were on a team of half penetration testers, and they used ASVS as a reference guide for penetration test engagements. So fantastic if you're developing, also fantastic reference on the offensive side. Great even earlier on before you write any code to make sure you're architecting properly. You can use it as the basis for unit tests. Also developer training. I still believe strongly developers should be trained, especially now these days. And you can use it as a benchmark for vendors to make sure they're doing a good job. You can ask like, hey, how rigorous is your design process? Do you take secure software development seriously? So ASVS is handy there. I included a screenshot because it occurred to me actually half an hour ago, I don't actually show anything from ASVS until halfway through this deck. That seemed a little heinous to me. So over in the bottom right, I included a screenshot from one of the sections about rate limiting. So I wanted to include this a bit earlier, just so I can give you all a reference if you haven't seen ASVS, what it looks like in v5. Quick show of hands, because I meant to do this earlier and totally didn't. Anyone used ASVS before? Cool. I was counting on a not unanimous room just so I could cover the basics again. How about anybody use ASVS since v5 was released last year? Perfect. Cool. All right. I have so much content for you all, but I will get to that. So anyway, for the half of the room that has not used the ASVS project, here's a snippet off to the right. I'll get into a bit more the structure of what you're looking at. All right, ASVS is one of OWASP's flagship projects. This is a common point just because one of the most well-known projects is the top 10. What you'll hear in any talk about ASVS, which there are many of on YouTube, and I encourage you to watch them. This talk will be on YouTube too. But what you will hear any presenters say or emphasize is that the OWASP top 10 really is more of an awareness document. So that is fantastic for beginners, people getting into the field, just to understand like, hey, what should I keep in mind at a high level? And that's where it is. ASVS, by contrast, is a lot more specific and includes actionable guidance for specific scenarios. And we are going to cover a lot of those specific scenarios today. I think this was a unanimous show of hands when I asked about familiarity with the OWASP Foundation. So like other OWASP projects, it's developed in the open by contributors like you and me. You can go to github.com/OWASP/ASVS, raise an issue if you believe something is missing or you would like to request clarification on some content that is there. That's just the nature of all OWASP projects, and ASVS is no different. I mentioned how it's actionable compared to awareness documents like the top 10. You're also really meant to fork ASVS when I mean for your organization. So not all of the requirements are going to be relevant to you. That's because we cover a bunch of protocols that you might not use at your organization. That might include GraphQL or WebSockets. Actually, we used to cover SOAP. I noticed that we don't anymore. Regardless, there are protocols or even just whole sections that either are not relevant to your organization or what you happen to be doing at the moment. For example, if you're reviewing a pull request on authorization, not all of the content in the whole guide is going to be relevant to you. So you're meant to get started by taking ASVS from GitHub, cloning it, and then tuning it for your AppSec program so that you give developers guidance that you think they will care about. All right, so I mentioned architectural, like structural changes. I'm also going to talk about some like principles that we kept in mind before I'll get into these. So these are the refactors that like I think you should care about. But things that we thought about as we revised certain requirements for ASVS v5, we tried to be a lot more tight with and meaningful with our verbiage. I know that we deleted a lot of duplicate requirements. We also had to like rephrase because we got plenty of feedback on GitHub, like, this is confusing. I don't know what this means. I know actually I authored a couple of requirements. We have a gentleman on the one of the project leads, Ilar, for ASVS, who's very enthusiastic about opening issues and pull requests saying like, hey, I don't know what this means, or your requirement has filler words. You should consider removing those. So very grateful for that because I for one, am very prone to filler words. So I hope that you'll find ASVS v5 a lot more concise. Yeah. Oh, and finally, we tried to make a lot of the requirements more relevant to modern web and API architectures. So the old version, ASVS v4, which came out in 2019 and was updated in 2021, that started moving away from a traditional like client-server architecture. You started seeing like recognition of microservices. That came out. But that has only become more relevant to everybody. So we've tried to include a lot more requirements that reflect the greenfield systems you're probably building today. But with that said, let me get into things I think you should keep in mind as you look at ASVS v5. The big one, we moved around requirements to make the levels more balanced. Let me go back a few slides just to show you what I mean by that. So for those of you who haven't seen ASVS before, all of the requirements are distributed across levels, levels 1, 2, or 3. So we can think of those as maturity levels, either for your organization or an application. What we used to say about the levels is that level 1 consisted of like the minimum that anybody should implement for any application, or that level 1 was like the pen testable level. We've started moving away from that for a few reasons. First of all, according to this bar graph that hopefully reflects the right number, there were about 130 requirements just to get started that we were saying, like, this is the minimum that you should be doing for everything. And we thought about that and we're like, we would rather people get started and not feel intimidated by just the quantity of requirements. So that was a big motivation for us to rebalance the level distribution. Another principle that came to mind for us, if you talk to any expert, hopefully you're not just doing black box pen tests for verification, because we used to say like level 1 is the pen testable level. Whereas now what we'll say is like, if you're doing assessments, hopefully you're also having somebody look at source code. Hopefully you're also doing developer interviews. And those are going to encompass a lot of like level 2, level 3 requirements. So we're no longer saying like one of these is the pen testable level. There's going to be pen test relevant requirements across all the levels. And I think what matters is that it's going to be a lot easier to get started. Cool. I alluded to this earlier. We dropped a lot of requirements. For those of you who used ASVS v4, the first chapter was about architecture, and we dropped that. Reason for that is we wanted to tighten our scope, again, to focus on properties of the code, which meant that anything ancillary, so like SDLC considerations or threat modeling considerations, we realized a couple of things. First of all, we're no less strident about threat modeling. I, for one, will continue to insist that everybody do that. But that's starting to be covered in other OWASP projects, for example. Anyone used SAM before? Neat. So that is more germane, I believe, to the maturity of an organization and its processes. So that's why we felt, okay, those projects are going to cover more lifecycle processes, and we are going to focus on things that you can verify just by looking at code independently. So that's the, when I say properties over process, I'm really underscoring that part. As we were looking at requirements to cut or to add, we asked ourselves, Is this going to specifically improve the security posture if we add this? Most of the time the answer is yes, but there were nevertheless a lot of debates internally when we proposed adding new stuff. There's a lot of recommendations that we had because everybody in the working group and in the ASVS project and out on GitHub is very opinionated about what we should be doing. That said, we had to be very thoughtful about what can we in good conscience reasonably say is a requirement versus like, I think you should be doing this. I'll cover this again at the end, but we have an Appendix D recommendations. That is a laundry list of stuff we wanted to tell you to do, but couldn't actually consider a requirement. But that enables us to use ASVS like a standard, again, unlike things like top 10, which is not a standard and one does not comply with the top 10. Cool. Onward. Actually, you know what? Let me emphasize, when I say verifiable, I alluded to this earlier also, but we want the outcomes to be Boolean for every requirement. Like some code is either adhering to this or it is not. And as I've already said, you can ascertain that just from looking at source. Cool. One thing we did, which is a favor to us in the working group, but hopefully you will all understand also, we dropped explicit mappings to CWE and to NIST. Anyone not familiar with CWE? Cool, I will touch on that briefly. So that's a project by the MITRE Corporation. And you can think of that more as like an abstract taxonomy of kinds of things that can go wrong. It's a fantastic project. But what we realized is there's not necessarily a one-to-one mapping between things that we were requiring and this CWE taxonomy. So great project. As for NIST, with ASVS 4, we mapped to, I believe it was the digital identity guidelines, was the NIST document that we wanted to align with. There are a few considerations, though. NIST is a US standards organization, and presumably many people in this room are going to be mapping to standards that are not that. Here in Norway, actually, the Cyber Resilience Act is going to be applicable sooner rather than later. In 2027, I believe, it becomes fully enforced. And I did check, that applies to the European Economic Area as well. So yes, Norway is going to be included. So for those reasons, actually, let me add to that a third. There's another OWASP project you should know and care about, and that is OpenCRE. That's why I mentioned it 3 times in the slide. But that is endeavoring to be the universal mapping for all of our standards. So I know that's one thing I personally will be contributing to in 2026, is putting back a lot of those mappings, except directly into the OpenCRE project. So you should all check out this, this project as well. That's where the mappings are gonna live from here on out. So hopefully that's okay with you all. If you found the mappings useful, I hope that this is going to be more accessible for you in the future. Neat. All right, so I'm gonna call out a few specific chapters. We released a lot of completely new sections. These are the ones I want to touch on briefly and just highlight all the new sections under it. And then we'll get to the live demo of a few areas. Let me catch up in my notes. Cool, I already talked about dropping V1, so we can move on. Okay, the new V1 in ASVS V5 is just about encoding and sanitization. One thing we realized, again, as we dropped architecture and thought about what should come first, encoding and sanitization was really scattered across a bunch of different chapters. That is, we had requirements that felt spiritually that they belonged in one unit, all around the concept of sanitization of one thing or another. So we hope you find this new chapter a lot more impactful. A lot of these were driven by specific CVEs or incidents. LaTeX processing, the math formula formats. There was a CVE in 2020 leading to a remote code execution. somehow through math formulas. So that's another thing that should be sanitized. We have a gentleman on the working group, Iman, who has been opening a bunch of issues. There are a lot more people in the working group, but he's just been on a tear. CSV injection was one such thing where he's like, hey, we don't have this. We probably should. And so we've got a sanitization requirement around that too. JNDI, who can tell me what that was in response to? Sorry? Yeah, log4shell, exactly. Yeah, log4j is the underlying library. Yeah, so as we see major incidents like these, we're like, do we need to cover this? One thing I didn't mention earlier, we try to make the requirements language agnostic for the most part. There are some exceptions because JNDI is a Java-specific thing or a Java runtime-specific thing. So again, for the most part, you will not see like Ruby or Python-specific stuff. But there are exceptions such as these. Use after free, I added that one because I noted that we had a very small but mighty section about unmanaged code. The ASVS really is meant to focus on web and API code. I'll touch on this later. We have related projects that might be more relevant to low-level code. However, from time to time, we might still end up touching code that deals with like raw pointers or unmanaged or unsafe blocks. Has anyone dealt with unsafe code in a web app before? Yeah, exactly. A few years ago, I had to do the same. I supported a web app. It was ASP.NET, I believe, but in the back end, we were doing interop calls with machine learning applications that were running basically written in Windows C++ and would feed data directly into our web app. So occasionally these things are still relevant. So yeah, somehow we didn't have considerations about dangling pointers or use after freeze. Now we do. Yeah, so now that web apps look fairly different, SPAs, for one, are a lot more common than they used to be. There's a lot of new headers that became relevant and recommended in recent years. Again, Iman on the working group was on a tear. I was looking at some of the issues over the years, and I'm like, this guy's very observant with what needs to be added. So that all is tremendously relevant if you're building. We have a whole chapter now specifically about front-end security. I'm really excited about self-contained tokens. We had basically brief mentions of JWTs briefly. I'll get to that in the next section also. But requiring that you have to specify an algorithm to verify hashes for tokens, that is super relevant. I noticed that as I submitted a bug bounty finding not too long ago, where I noticed that there is a JWT verifier that did not specify an algorithm, and that just makes for a very easy authentication bypass. Same with enforcing expiration time. The whole thing about stateless and service-to-service authorization is you can't let your tokens live forever. So enforcing expiration time seemed to us like a pretty basic thing to cover. But yeah, basically JWTs have their own section now. I want to get to the demo now for some specific stuff that we added, and actually I want to show some code, and then together we're going to figure out what's wrong with it and how we might be able to fix it. Cool. So another thing I want to call out now, OAuth has its own chapter. Just like JWTs, all self-contained tokens just got a very brief and cursory mention in v4, which might have made sense because in 2019, these things were becoming more relevant. I wouldn't say they were new, but that was our first major foray out of the client-server world. So you're looking at a screenshot right now of ASVS 4 and the extent to which OAuth was mentioned in any capacity. Whereas now we've got a chapter dedicated to both that for the authorization side and also OIDC for identity. So especially relevant nowadays when we have service-to-service authorization and just a lot more complicated microservice-based architectures. These things are worth considering. So I cooked up an example. What I would like us to do is take a look at this snippet from a sample Spring app and understand what it's not doing. So I'll give you guys a second to look at this code snippet. What are we validating here? What are we doing? So for starters, in this line of code, we're validating the, sorry?
Running a timer every minute?
Basically validating the timestamp. What claims are we validating in this code?
Sure.
Yep. Anything we're not validating that stands out? Exactly. I didn't even have to get to the hints. I love you guys. I had a whole section like, let me phrase it another way. Yes, audience is missing. I'm glad you guys are very eagle-eyed and picked up on that because we have requirements that say like, hey, there might be an issue specifically with like if you omit that. Because this code isn't sloppy, it's checking for a lot of things. There's just some claims that might be relevant. So what we end up with is a scenario where the service could accept any valid token from that issuer. Adding this audience claim check helps tremendously with that. That went a lot faster than expected. Again, love you guys. Cool. I noticed that this is the last talk of the day. I plan to plug Tobias's talk. Hopefully you guys saw that. That just happened directly preceding this one. The recording will also be on YouTube. I encourage you to watch it because he wrote a lot of the requirements around authentication and OAuth. So definitely encourage you to check that out. I think he built a sample application where he shows like, how can you use ASVS to implement that? All right, now for a section that I wrote, and I'm especially excited to talk about. I'm like, should I? Yes, because I wrote it. So you're looking at a snippet from v4 here. This is the entirety of any mention of race conditions in ASVS v4. It's not nothing, it ain't bad. But you'll mention that it kind of conceptually crams a lot of things into one sentence. And that's something where I thought, maybe we could use some more actionable specific guidance. So now we have 4 new requirements dedicated to specific flavors of race condition. Actually, I wanted 6. I introduced 6 in my pull request. I think we talked that down, out of the interest of concision. We didn't want to overwhelm you, the reader. I can talk to you all later about what those other 2 dropped requirements were. Yeah, so now we'll get to some examples of what that looks like. I did this in Golang specifically. One thing that I hear from time to time, which seems a little silly to me, is that Golang is safe, just because concurrency is this first-class principle in the language. And that is true. Golang makes concurrent code a lot easier, but you can still absolutely have or be subject to race conditions. So out of curiosity, can anyone tell me what flavor of race condition we're dealing with here? Don't mind the fact that we're pulling parameters out of get. That's not the most sound decision in the world, but that's besides the point. So first we're reading a balance, then we're making an external API call, and then we're performing some action based on that balance.
transactions out twice?
Yeah, potentially. And I'm going to get to something like that in a bit. But yeah, that's plausible. What I'm specifically looking for is the term time of check, time of use, which basically describes the scenario where we check for something, then not as part of an atomic transaction, do something with that information. Making an external API call in between only makes this a little more error prone. Yeah, so this is specifically a time of check, time of use race condition. Let me ask this, how can we fix this? I mentioned concurrency primitives earlier. Could we add something to this code to make it safer? Sorry? Sorta. So I'm thinking more like concurrency primitives. Yeah, potentially. So I use transactions in my next example. Right here, I'm looking for something like a mutex. So we could use like actual features of the language to denote like, this is a critical section, and we don't want other Go routines, which is Golangese for thread, basically. We don't want any other thread clobbering this process. So we want to check the balance, and we want to do something with it, and we want to make sure that that information doesn't necessarily change in between. So that's one of the recommendations we had. In this other example, I get into, I guess this isn't transactions, but we're getting a lock out of a database instead. So not directly out of the language, but leveraging Postgres for the same purpose. This is another flavor of race condition that I really wanted to call out and was not mentioned in ASVS v4, but I felt should have, so we included it. So let me narrate through this a little bit. First, we are getting information about a wallet, or we're acquiring locks in two particular orders. First, a lock on a wallet, and then a ledger, and then in a different method, ledger, and then wallet. Can anyone guess at what could go wrong? Deadlock, yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm not sure. Way at the back? Cool, thanks. Exactly, so this could be a deadlock condition. So that is now named explicitly, I think here in 15.4.3. I'm doing pretty good on time, so I can throw out one more concept. If we wanted to add, like, say, mutexes to this code, how could we keep track of those? So one thing I call out here in this first requirement is that we want to make sure to use concurrency safe types. So maybe we have mutexes per user, but then we make sure that that's stored in something like Golang has a sync package. So we want to make sure that those mutexes also don't get clobbered. So it turns out a lot more specifics we could get into in the world of race conditions. Another reason why we decided to expand it from v4. Cool. And this is how you actually apply ASVS day to day, right? We're hoping that this isn't something you read and memorize. I mean, you can. I know I haven't memorized ASVS v4 or v5. Hopefully what you're doing is you're looking at code and you're like, something looks amiss here. What can we do about this? Or how can we improve it? That's what ASVS is for. And with v5, we're hoping that it's even easier to navigate. Cool. So, catching up on my notes again. Closing thoughts. I didn't get to every other section that I could have. So there's some sections that I'd love to call out. I was like, do I do a demo for this? I don't know, like, I'm not sure how many people in this room have written code around WebRTC in production code. Raise your hand if you have. Yeah, me neither. But it is a protocol that's nevertheless relevant, so we added guidance around that. Same with WebSockets. I do want to talk about the appendices, though, and I alluded to one of them earlier. So Appendix C cryptography. That includes a lot of specific recommendations about algorithms you should be using for different use cases. So for hashing, key derivation, passwords, we explicitly recommend Argon2ID, and we get into a lot of the logic behind that. I remember when we were getting ready to release v5, we thought about like, do we put this in the requirement? And then we thought, no, it would get too long and verbose. Definitely check out Appendix C cryptography. There's a lot of really relevant information that we want you to see, just felt like it would clutter up the main document. And then Appendix D, again, those are a lot of things that like we think you should be doing, but we can't actually say like you must or else. Let's see, I think I have a list of some of them. Password strength meter, I think, is one of the recommendations. We all think that is a great idea that you present when allowing users to register for an account. But we're not going to go and say, like, you must have this or else you're not adhering to ASVS level 2, for example. Also, one doesn't adhere necessarily to ASVS. I think it's more accurate to say you're assessed against a level. All the same. We're like, we can't tell you you have to do this, but really you should. So check out Appendix D also. And then we have full lists of everything that changed. ASVS.dev has both the latest update to ASVS 4 and a mapping of specific controls that were either added or, if you go the other way, deleted. So yeah. And then a whole document about like, if you've used ASVS before, here's some of the principles to keep in mind. Those are what I talked about earlier, those key principles around like rebalancing the levels, tightening our scope. So that's all covered also in ASVS v5. I mentioned, actually I didn't have to explain the OWASP Foundation because everybody in the room knows what it is. I had some notes in here if I did. We're a nonprofit. We maintain literally hundreds of projects that contain useful guidance for developers. I wanted to call out a specific selection. There are so many more projects that you should care about. Please go and learn more about them. But these were ones that I felt might come up in the Q&A. So I'm like, let me address them here briefly. I already talked about top 10 as an awareness document. Proactive controls, that's another top 10 that actually is a bit more actionable. We have a few other SVSs, or verification standards. I alluded to this before, but we have one for mobile. We have an IoT-specific one that's going to have a lot more low-level stuff than our small but mighty section with use after free. So do check that out if it's relevant to you. We just had a secure pipeline verification standard get started. I hid one bullet point. Here's a silly question for the audience. Can anyone tell me about this hot new domain that just became super relevant in the last couple of years? A something, yes. A what? A star. What is this, algorithms class? AISVS. I mentioned Tobias is here. Definitely talk to him afterwards as one of the working group members. Jim Manico, one of the project leads for ASVS, is also a project lead for AISVS. So if you have any questions about AI, and I'm confident that at least one of you will, because I've given other talks and somebody always asks about AI, try to find Jim or learn more about the AISVS. Fantastic project that endeavors to really address some of those concerns. We have the testing guide series, which complements the SVS projects nicely. It's more on the, obviously, testing part of the SDLC. I love the cheat sheet series. I think that's another one Jim maintains. But whereas ASVS is really actionable and includes specific requirements, but we don't get into detail, cheat sheet series does. So you're going to find code snippets there for like, if you want to implement something correctly, but you'd like a snippet to get started, that's where you'll find it. I alluded to SAM earlier, but that's where all the SDLC stuff lives. So again, we in ASVS still maintain you should threat model, but now SAM is going to be the project that really advocates for that. I talked about OpenCRE. That's where all the mappings are going to live. We are not going to maintain this anymore. It was a bit of a maintenance headache for us, and hopefully that'll make it relevant, or even more relevant to the rest of you who maybe aren't using CWE or NIST day to day. I also wanted to call out the Wayfinder. That is a widget on the OWASP website that includes links to other projects you might not have known about before. So there's plenty of others, including dependency tracking, threat modeling, some WAF configuration projects. Again, a lot of great resources. Please give them a look. Oh yeah, so for my actual hot take of the day, forgot to insert this preamble earlier. I have to mention AI to one degree or another. Because people ask me like, okay, these are standards for developers to read and understand, but in a lot of organizations, they're moving toward having chatbots, draft code, or even write and push production code these days. A little scary, but that is the world we are moving to. Let's put it this way, even the bot, even your agent, needs to have standards to follow, right? How do you know if your bot is doing a good job? That's what ASVS exists to do, is like some benchmark to be like, how do I know that this is actually producing code that I feel safe to push to production? Or hopefully you're still reviewing code written by a chatbot, or some human is doing that, and then ASVS can be the reference guide. So you can be like, hey, Claude, for example, I noticed you drafted this code. I want to push back on that a little bit because requirement 2.4.2 on rate limiting says so-and-so, and your code doesn't really address that. So all the more relevant even these days. Keep an eye out for projects, including OWASP projects, that are going to try and integrate stuff like ASVS into MCP servers. I think we are going to work on that this weekend here at the OWASP Project Summit. Very excited about that. There's definitely also commercial offerings that I can't necessarily talk about or endorse, but this is becoming more of a thing. So just keep that in mind. Standards and requirements are not becoming any less relevant just because we live in LLM land. And that's all I have. Groovy. Questions? Yes?
With the rebalancing of the levels,
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense any longer to aim for level 1, or with any effort aim to pursue the level 2 immediately?
You totally should. In fact, I would encourage that, and that's why part of why we did the rebalance. Even so, from my perspective, I think every single control I added or contributed to V5 ended up being level 2 or level 3. So I'm not going to say like, you don't have to aspire to level 2 or level 3, but I think it's an accessible and achievable starting point for a team. I'm guessing you work with developers, and I think it's going to be a lot more palatable to say, start with this, start here, and then you can feel great about yourselves, and then we can work on level 2 and level 3. So that can be on your personal roadmap. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily shoot for that immediately unless you know your developers are really enthusiastic. You totally could, though. Groovy.
Are there any sources that feed into ASVS as like primary things that you consider when you're building it out, or?
Mostly GitHub and GitHub issues. I alluded to this earlier. Some of our contributors will note issues that have no requirements whatsoever. DOM clobbering was one of them when I talked about web front-end security. That was an issue that had no coverage whatsoever. RDoS, or regular expression abuse, CSV injection, those are all things that we like intellectually understand. This is a problem. And then somebody went to GitHub one day and said, you should have a requirement about this. So for now, what's feeding into it is people. Yeah. Anything else? Cool. Thank you.